You are hungry. Really hungry. There is no grocery store, no farm, no label telling you what contains peanuts, and definitely no little skull symbol warning you that the bright red berry in your hand might shut down your liver. Around you are thousands of possible foods: leaves, roots, mushrooms, insects, fruits, nuts, shellfish, eggs, meat, and things growing underground that you cannot even identify until you dig them up. Some will feed you, some will make you vomit for 2 days, and some can kill you. So how did ancient humans figure out what was actually safe to eat? The obvious answer sounds horrible. Somebody ate it first. And yes, sometimes that probably happened. But humans had something much better than randomly sacrificing one unlucky caveman every time somebody found a new berry. They had millions of years of evolutionary instincts, extremely cautious tasting, observation, cooking, and most importantly, other humans. Start with the easiest foods. If you are walking through prehistoric Africa and find a ripe, sweet fruit, your brain is already giving you a giant green light. Humans are naturally attracted to sweetness because sugar means energy. Salt is valuable because your body needs sodium. Fat is incredibly calorie-dense, which matters when every meal requires physical work to find. Meanwhile, extremely bitter tastes often make us hesitate. That is not an accident. Many toxic plant chemicals taste bitter, so humans evolved taste receptors capable of detecting them. Put something horribly bitter on a baby's tongue and you do not need to explain botany. The reaction is basically, absolutely not. But this system has a massive problem. Bitter does not automatically mean poisonous, and poisonous does not automatically mean bitter. Plenty of perfectly edible foods contain bitter compounds, while some dangerous foods can taste surprisingly normal. So, instinct could warn ancient humans, but it could not give them a complete menu. Smell helped too. Rotten meat produces chemicals that humans often find disgusting, and spoiled food can trigger an immediate reaction before it even reaches your mouth. Again, useful but not perfect. Some dangerous bacteria and toxins have no obvious smell at all. Ancient humans were not walking around with a built-in poison detector. Their senses were more like a smoke alarm. Sometimes it warned them about danger. Sometimes it screamed because somebody burned dinner. And sometimes the house was on fire without making enough smoke. So what happens when you find something completely unfamiliar? This is where ancient food probably became much more cautious than simply taking a giant bite. Imagine finding a strange nut. You might smell it, touch it, break it open. Watch whether touching the sap irritates your skin. Put a tiny amount against your lips. Maybe taste an extremely small piece and spit it out. Then wait. If nothing happens, perhaps you try a little more later. We cannot reconstruct a universal prehistoric food testing procedure because different groups lived in different environments and left behind very little evidence of exactly how they experimented. But humans clearly learned enormous bodies of detailed knowledge about local plants, and gradual experimentation would have been far less dangerous than swallowing a full serving of something unknown. Still, eventually somebody had to eat it, and sometimes the answer was discovered the worst possible way. Someone eats a plant. Hours later, they start vomiting. Everyone remembers the plant. Someone eats a different mushroom. They become confused, collapse, or die. Nobody needs a written warning label after that. The person who survives now possesses information more valuable than almost anything they own. Do not eat that. But even this creates another problem. What if the poisonous food does not kill you immediately? Some toxins act slowly. Others only become dangerous after repeated exposure. Some plants are safe in one part but dangerous in another. A fruit might be edible while its seeds contain toxins. A root might be dangerous raw but edible after processing. A food might be safe when ripe and harmful when unripe. This means ancient humans were not merely learning species. They were learning instructions. Eat this part, not that part. Pick it during this season. Remove the skin. Cook it first. Do not eat too much. And that information could take generations to perfect. This is where humans gained perhaps their greatest advantage. We copy each other. Imagine growing up in a prehistoric group. You are not born into a completely unknown wilderness. Your mother already knows which berries she eats. Older hunters know which animals are worth chasing. Someone knows where certain roots grow. Someone knows which shellfish become dangerous during certain times of year. A child watching adults eat is basically receiving thousands of food safety lessons without anyone needing to explain chemistry. When an elder refuses to touch a mushroom, that mushroom does not need to kill another 20 people for the lesson to stick. Humans could transfer survival information from one brain to another. That sounds obvious now, but it changes everything. Most animals must rely heavily on instinct and individual learning. Humans can inherit information without inheriting it genetically. Your grandfather almost dies eating something. Your father learns the warning. You learn it from your father. You can avoid a poison encountered decades before you were born. Eventually, this knowledge becomes tradition. Never eat those berries. Dig these roots only after the rains. That shellfish is safe, but not during this season. A rule might survive long after everyone has forgotten the original person who discovered it. And sometimes, those strange food traditions turned out to be incredibly sophisticated. Take plants that contain natural toxins or chemicals that make them difficult to eat. Humans discovered that pounding, soaking, washing, roasting, boiling, fermenting, or repeatedly changing the water could transform foods that were dangerous or unpleasant into valuable calories. Cassava is one of the clearest modern examples of why this matters. Certain varieties contain compounds capable of releasing cyanide, yet humans learned processing methods that make cassava a major staple food. Nobody needed to understand cyanogenic glycosides. They only needed to understand, do these steps, or people get sick. Acorns provide another example. Many contain high levels of bitter tannins, but indigenous peoples and other societies developed ways of grinding and leaching them with water, turning something unpleasant into an important food source. Fire made this entire system even more powerful. Cooking did not just make meat taste better. Heat can kill many pathogens and parasites, soften tough plants, improve digestibility, and in some cases, reduce harmful compounds. Suddenly, humans were not limited to asking, "Can I eat this?" They could ask, "Can I change this into something I can eat?" That enormously expanded the menu. A raw tuber might be unpleasant or dangerous. Roast it, and it could become dinner. Tough meat filled with parasites becomes dramatically safer when cooked thoroughly. Hard seeds become easier to digest after heating or grinding. Humans were effectively doing food chemistry hundreds of thousands of years before anyone knew what chemistry was. But there was another source of information walking around the landscape: animals. If birds were eating a fruit, could humans eat it too? Sometimes, watching animals probably offered clues about where food could be found. But copying animals blindly would be a terrible survival strategy. Different species tolerate different chemicals. A fruit that a bird happily swallows may contain something harmful to a human. Koalas eat eucalyptus leaves that would be a terrible lunch for us. Dogs can become seriously ill from foods humans eat routinely. So, an ancient human watching an animal eat something might think, "Interesting," not necessarily, "Pass me a bowl." The safest information still came from other humans, and this may explain why food knowledge became such an important part of culture. Think about the amount of information required just to survive in one environment. Which mushrooms appear after rain? Which roots are underground during the dry season? Which animals migrate at what time? Which plants can be used as medicine? Which plants look almost identical except one of them makes you sick? One person could never rediscover all of that from scratch every generation. A group that preserved information had a huge advantage over a group constantly repeating old mistakes, and children were especially important. Humans have unusually long childhoods. For years, children watch, imitate, ask questions, and learn before becoming fully independent. That is expensive. You have to feed a child who cannot yet provide everything for themselves. But it creates something extremely powerful, a long training period. A child can spend years learning a landscape before their survival completely depends on making the correct decisions alone. They learn that this berry is good, this one is not, this root has to be cooked, this mushroom is avoided, this animal is dangerous, and that tree contains something useful. By adulthood, they are carrying an invisible database built by people who lived before them. But none of this means ancient humans never poisoned themselves. They absolutely made mistakes. People still poison themselves with wild mushrooms today, despite books, phones, hospitals, and the internet. Now imagine doing the same thing without any of that. Famine would make the problem even worse. When familiar food disappears, suddenly foods normally ignored start looking a lot more attractive. Bark, unfamiliar roots, questionable meat, strange seeds. Hunger changes the calculation. Something with a 10% chance of poisoning you looks different when the alternative is definitely starving. And migrations created another dangerous situation. Humans repeatedly entered new environments filled with species they had never encountered before. A group moving into unfamiliar territory could not simply reuse every food rule from home. They had to learn a new landscape. Some knowledge transferred. Sweet fruit still looked promising. Rotten meat still smelled horrible. Fire still helped. But local species required local knowledge. Every migration was partly an enormous experiment in figuring out what the new world would allow humans to eat. Eventually, however, humans did something that radically reduced the uncertainty. We started controlling our food. Instead of constantly asking which wild plant was safe, people increasingly encouraged and later domesticated plants they already knew were useful. Over generations, humans selected crops for traits like larger seeds, better taste, easier harvesting, and sometimes lower levels of unwanted chemicals. Animals were domesticated too. Food slowly moved from, what can we find today, toward, what can we deliberately produce? The wilderness did not disappear, but the menu became more predictable, and that may be the most important answer to the original question. Ancient humans did not simply figure out what was poisonous once. They built a system that prevented every new person from having to figure it out again. Instinct gave them warnings. Their senses gave them clues. Tiny experiments gave them information. Fire and processing turned dangerous or difficult foods into usable ones. Mistakes sometimes taught brutal lessons, but culture preserved those lessons. One person could suffer from a poisonous plant, and hundreds of people born later could survive because the story remained. So the next time you look at a mushroom and wonder who was crazy enough to eat the first one, the answer probably was not one reckless ancient human wandering around stuffing random objects into his mouth. It was generations of people testing, watching, cooking, remembering, teaching, and occasionally making catastrophic mistakes. The real survival tool was not an ancient poison detector. It was the fact that once humans learned something could kill them, they became very, very good at making sure their children knew too.